Thank you. Thank you, Una. Thank you to the organizers of this conference. I'm pleased to be here. And as you say, we're having a conversation, not a structured presentation, which fits with fits with my preferences. But anyway, I'm happy to be here. So we don't have much time, so let's get into it.
So first thing I want to ask you, as we know, plants and fungi made a large variety of so-called secondary molecules that are not essential for life, but they still have it, and those molecules are not present in all species, but they serve a function, and they are kind of messengers of communication and making relationships. This is why you often speak about plant teachers. Like there is a literary library of information on there, and plants, especially psychedelic plants, are kind of operating system that lets you access this information and understand it. Could you elaborate a bit how this mechanism, the relationship between plants and humans, is actually working?
Well, yes. So we, plants and fungi make an incredible variety of so-called secondary compounds, which are not, there's nothing secondary about them other than that they don't occur in all species. They are not molecules essential for life. But in the ecosystem, in the terrestrial biome, these secondary compounds are chemical messengers. Plants and fungi, to a certain degree, they regulate relationships with other organisms in the environment, and that may range from bacteria and fungi in the soil to animals like us, or things that insects, the whole spectrum of terrestrial life. Plants mediate their relationship with these with the organisms that they share the biosphere with through chemistry. In a certain sense, you might say that plants substitute biosynthesis for behavior. Animals respond to their environment through behavior. You know, they can run away or they can stay and fight, and but plants are stuck in one place, and the same is true of fungi. So they have to rely on chemistry to mediate their behavior and their response to other organisms. And then, so this is true at every level of organization and every type of interaction. But the psychoactive substances, the psychoactive molecules, just happen to target the receptors in the brain, particularly the serotonin receptors that seem to be important in mediating consciousness. And this is a reflection of millions of years of coevolution. The plants and the molecules are far older than our species, but they interact with our species. They seem to have become repurposed to serve this function of being essentially mediators between our species, which is severely estranged from nature. This is our problem. The plants are chemical messengers, basically giving us the tools to wake up and re-examine and re-understand our relationship with nature. And that's why it's often said that psychedelics may be our best hope for saving the planet. If there is a hope, I don't know that psychedelics are the total answer, but I think it's certainly an important part of the equation.
But we humans invest a lot of time in defining our borders and how we are different from all others and what separates us from all others. When we know that it's all not true, we all are one. Why we have such a problem to accept this situation, and what is our place as a biological beings in the web of life?
You know, I don't know why we have become so estranged from nature. I mean, it's a puzzle to me. You know, I mean, I think there are multiple reasons. You know, civilization has, you know, I mean, I think we all appreciate civilization, but civilization introduces a distancing of our species from nature, and you know, and it's hubris basically. It's the perception that somehow we're better than nature. We're not only separate from it, but we're the top species in nature. You know, we're the most intelligent species in nature. But if you look at what's actually going on the biospheric level, you might actually make the argument that we're one of the stupider species in nature, in the sense that, you know, we seem to be making all the wrong choices. We're undermining the equilibrium of nature that keeps the biosphere amenable to life, that keeps it, that you know, supports life. And on the biospheric level and also in the ecosystems level, this is all based on feedback loops that maintain this equilibrium in the fairly narrow parameters that support life, you know, and somehow we've forgotten this. And if you look at nature, other processes in nature, what's going on with plants, fungi, and virtually everything else, the idea that we are the only intelligent species is completely misunderstanding what's going on. You know, intelligence permeates the biosphere in a certain sense. You know, what we see going on in the biosphere is not, you know, it's an evidence of an inherent built-in intelligence. Now, many of these, you know, there's a prejudice that in order to have consciousness, in order to have brain intelligence, you have to have a brain. Well, recent information, recent discoveries indicate that that's completely a misunderstanding. What you need is highly connected networks, you know, and the brain is one example of that. You know, we can probably, you know, legitimately say that we have among the most complex nervous systems of any organism in the biosphere, but that does not necessarily make us superior. You know, if you look at the ecological dynamics of old growth forests, for example, they're highly organized, intelligent systems, self-organizing, self-regulating systems. Brains are not involved as we understand it, and yet they are intelligent. So part of our challenge is to learn to recognize where intelligence is in nature and respect it and help you know, increase our relationship with what you might call the more than human elements of the biosphere. Humans are not at the top. There is no pyramid. You know, we're all involved in symbiotic networks, and that's sort of a change in understanding that we need to implement, that we need to recognize at least.
It is interesting that, for example, mushrooms are not in danger of extinction compared with humanity right now. And speaking of future of humans as species, maybe it's one of our missions in order to survive, to form and renew symbiotic and essentially biological relationships with these plant teachers. What do you think?
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, mushrooms are not endangered compared to other species of plants, other ecosystems. Fungi are amazingly resilient and adaptive. And, but, you know, perhaps it's an exaggeration. I mean, what we're doing essentially or potentially is a threat to all life on Earth, mushrooms and everything else, because we're undermining the processes on the planet that sustain life. And at a certain point, these equilibrium biofeedback systems, they're amazingly resilient, and the planet's ability to heal itself when these systems are disrupted is remarkable. But at a certain point, you reach a tipping point where you cannot reverse these processes, or before this conference earlier this morning, I was reading an article where the panel on climate change is now projecting that by 2027, we're going to reach a point where we cross that critical threshold of raising global temperatures beyond the 1.5 degrees centigrade that's been identified as the critical pressure. If it goes beyond that, these processes can become irreversible. So I think what the psychedelics are is a message to our species to basically wake up. They're a wake-up call, and they put in front of us the fact that we are not separate from nature, whether we like it or not. We're actually part of nature. It doesn't exist for our benefit. It's not there for us to dominate. We are not running the show. This is the message that psychedelic sends to almost everyone who experiences them. We monkeys are not in control. If anything, the biospheric community of plants and fungi are running the show, because they are maintaining the basic mechanisms that make life on Earth possible. So it's it's very resistant, very resilient, but not impossible to destabilize these to a critical point. And so effectively, I think what the plants and fungi, the plant teachers, the fungal teachers, that is the message that they're trying to propagate to us, that we have to view our role in the planet as one of symbiosis, of facilitating symbiotic relationships, mutually beneficial relationships with other species, rather than attempting to control it. We need to change that perspective. So,
is it possible to nail the time frame for how long those plant teachers were having a relationship with humans? I know there are only speculations, but we already know that ayahuasca, for example, this tradition goes back to millennia. Also, mushrooms. You have the stone ape theory, which you had together with your great brother Terensu Makena.
Right. So what is the question?
The question is it possible to nail down the time frame for how long we have this relationship with plant teachers as humanity?
Well, how long we've had the relationship is open to speculation. But probably it depends on a lot of things, but it's not unreasonable to think that our relationship, possibly with mushrooms at least, may be millions of years old, because if we look at the environment in North Africa, where hominids are thought to have evolved, if you look at the paleoclimatic data for 2 or 3 million years ago, we know that it was a savanna environment. It was it was a much wetter environment than it is now. We know from fossil evidence that not only this is where the hominids evolved, but it's also where the ancestors of the modern cattle evolved, and the mushrooms happen to. That's the substrate that they grow on, is the dung of these cattle. And of course, the cattle were most likely very important for the hominids that were living in that region at that time as a source of food and other types of things. So this triad of the hominid mushroom cattle relationship, we know from paleoclimatic data and fossil evidence that existed in Africa at that time, and this is the environment in which we evolved and in which we became human, because what we know from the pharmacology of things like psilocybin particularly, they stimulate the formation of neural networks. Essentially, they're a catalyst for the complexification of the brain. If you look at the fossil record, as spotty as it is, the human brain, essentially increased in size, tripled in size over about 2 million years, which is a long time, but in terms of evolutionary time, it's actually the blink of an eye. So what catalyzed this? What contributed to this catalysis in the size of the brain? Obviously, the hominids in this environment were facing a lot of challenges. So advances in cognition. We also know that mushrooms increase visual acuity, our response to our environment. So it may be that, this was a decisive factor in essentially giving us a leg up, essentially contributing to the complexification of the human nervous system. And now we see the reflection of that in the current neural structures of Homo sapiens, and we're just the latest stage. And it's wrong to think that it is necessarily a linear situation. What we understand now from fossil evidence is there were many different groups of hominids evolving in this same area at that time, and they were interbreeding. There was a lot of genetic exchange between different species, and most likely through the processes of neuroplasticity, which mushrooms stimulate neuroplasticity, changes in the neural architecture of the brain, and epigenetics, which is a mechanism that can actually propagate these changes over generations. That's probably a reflection of how we got to be so complex neurologically, and also so problematic in a certain sense. So it's it's based on speculation, but we have enough information about the environment at that time that we can say more than likely this was the situation. If you look at any ecosystem now today, any tropical ecosystem where cattle are present, chances are you're going to find Psilocybe cubensis, which is the pan-tropical global psychedelic mushroom. It's been around for millions of years, far older than humanity itself. And if you're a foraging primate in these environments, you're hungry, you're looking for sustenance, and these are hard not to notice. And once noticed, then you're going to ingest them and have those revelations. That's going to, over time, change both the individual worldviews and the views of the understanding of nature and the cosmos and everything else of our species. So I think, what we are is, the mushrooms, particularly other psychedelic plants, such as ayahuasca, came much later because that requires a fairly sophisticated pharmacology and essentially technology to produce something like ayahuasca. Mushrooms don't require technology. All you have to do is be curious enough to bend over and pick one and eat it. No more processing is necessary than that. So I think the case you can make for the so-called stoned ape theory, which kind of the term is pejorative. It doesn't really do justice to it, but I think it's a plausible notion.
But speaking of today, there is also speculation or hypothesis that maybe the current psychedelic renaissance is initiated by plant teachers themselves. Because if you are looking on ayahuasca, how it spreads through the world and also in Europe, could be there's some truth in it. What is your opinion?
Yes, I think so. You mean, yeah, the plants are going to, the nature of symbiosis is that you enter into relationships that benefit both species, right? So the fact that, for example, you know, the interest, I mean, ayahuasca, for example, is for many years has been marginalized more or less into indigenous communities. Nobody but a few botanists and anthropologists were interested in it. But then suddenly the world woke up to it, and now it's spread all over the world, and that through human agency. So in some sense, if plants and fungi have an agenda, you know, other than to save the planet and help us wake up, but in terms of their own existence, you know, in the ecosystem, they want to spread. This is their agenda. Fungi are very good at this. Plants are very good at this. But if we can come along and facilitate that process by cultivating them and spreading them around, then effectively you know, this is a benefit to the plant or the fungus, because it doesn't have to compete in the ecosystem. You know, we domestication effectively protects it from the vicissitudes of natural selection or competition in the wild. You know, I mean, it creates other problems because the fact that, you know, we are problematic species. But I think maybe what you're seeing here is you know, in the 21st century, you're seeing this shift in global consciousness that is happening largely because so many people have discovered psychedelics, and they are getting the insights that psychedelics have to offer. You know, the question is, what will we do with those insights? You know, because the message is consistently that we have to radically change our relationship with nature. And again, we have to become symbiotic partners with nature. We have to get away from this notion that nature exists to serve us or that we dominate it. These are the perceptions that have led to the place where we are now, and this is what we have to get past. And you know, it's a desired development. I guess the question is, will it happen fast enough? It seems that there are many different competing trends, and if you look at the timeline at which life on Earth will become, well, much less comfortable, maybe impossible, you know, we're not talking hundreds of years or millions of years, we're talking a few decades at this point. So, you know, we need to not only wake up, but we need to wake up quickly and somehow foster a global consensus to really respond to this, to make enormous changes rapidly in the way that we live on this planet and relate to the rest of the biosphere.
I think this is also one of the reasons why you founded McKenna Academy, because McKenna Academy is trying to build bridges between indigenous ancient knowledge and scientific investigation. You call it a new mystery school, placing parallels with legendary Eleusinian mystery school in ancient Greece. What was Eleusis' role in creating Western culture as it is now? What is your viewpoint?
Well, Yes, I think this is the thing. The psychedelics plants and the knowledge of how to use them have been under the purview of indigenous cultures for so long, which have been largely marginalized by global culture. And this knowledge, as well as the genetics and the habitats where these things exist, which happen also to be the habitats that the people who use them inhabit. There's a great many challenges to this, and so we have to, we have to respect this knowledge and somehow bring it together with the scientific knowledge that we have, and again, create a synergy. Use what we know. Science is very useful for giving us information as far as the solutions to some of the problems that we face. But we should understand there are other ways of knowing that are not scientific, but no less valued. So if we can understand better indigenous perspectives on nature, this will enrich our own relationship and help us change our priorities. And so again, it comes back to symbiosis and synergy. We have a lot to learn from our plant teachers, the fungi and the psychedelic plants, but we have a lot to learn. We know that, and from the cultural traditions, the opportunity to learn and make changes is there, but we're also free to ignore it, and in some ways that's largely what we are doing. We're not hearing the message, we're not implementing the message or taking it to heart as a species. Many of us are, and those of us that are involved in psychedelics would like to think that we are. But how do we get the rest of the world to wake up? Not everyone can take psychedelics, but can we somehow propagate that message, beyond our psychedelic community? Sometimes I'm concerned that, those of us in the psychedelic world, the psychedelic community exists in a kind of bubble, and the rest of the world maybe doesn't even know about us, and even if they do, maybe they don't care. So how can we effectively use what we have learned from the plant teachers and propagate that to our fellow humans, and which has to happen on every level, and there are ways to do it, but it's also an incredible challenge.
Yes, I agree, Dennis. And the last question is, what do you think that with the rise of psychedelic research and the huge interest in the psychedelic field, are we getting closer also to the answer of the hard problem of consciousness?
Yes, I think so. Psychedelics are most of the focus now in science and psychedelics is on therapeutic applications, which are of course very important, and more, mental disorders, depression, anxiety, trauma, all of these things are more and more widespread because, it's almost as though it's impossible to live in a 21st century society without being traumatized. So, in some ways, the psychedelics are the answer for that. But beyond that, the question of consciousness, we have never before had tools that are more effective for exploring consciousness from the inside. We're very good at applying our technology to understanding neural structures, understanding brain function. We have neuroimaging methodologies, all of these things. We can open windows into the brain with our tools, with our imaging technology, and see that things are going on. When you take psychedelics, you can identify areas of the brain that are responding. You can look at long-term adaptations as a result of it, but you can't link the subjective effects, the feeling of what it is to be conscious with all these external measurements. And I think this is the big challenge for neuroscience in the 21st century, is to, if we really want to understand consciousness, we have to be able to look at what's going on the inside subjectively and relate that to what's going on to what we can measure, which is, it's a tricky thing. It's sometimes called the hard versus the easy problem in neuroscience. The easy problem is describing the neural structures that support consciousness, but the hard problem is relating to how is that actually reflected in subjective experience.
Thank you very much, Deniss, for this thought-provoking conversation.